Welcome to AEIOU, a podcast about Austria. I'm Andrew, your host. You might have noticed in the last episode that we skipped past the year 1789, which was one of the most consequential years in world history because it was the year in which the French Revolution began. But this is not a podcast about France, it's a podcast about Austria. So naturally, we're going to look this week at events in Belgium. At the time of the French Revolution, Belgium did not yet exist. The land that would eventually become Belgium was part of the Habsburg monarchy, and it was called the Austrian Netherlands. So events there cannot be truly separated from events in Austria until the two places are wholly separate countries, and even then the associations will often remain. Traditional dating of the French Revolution states that it began on July 17, 1789, with the storming of the Bastille. However, for today, we are going to look at events that began about a month later in the city of Liege, which today is in Belgium. Like the rest of what were loosely called the Netherlands, unhappiness in Liege had a long history before 1789. This land and its French-speaking population were ruled by a prince-bishop, which means that the Catholic Bishop of Liege was also the secular ruler of the territory. Since the Holy Roman Empire was still around at this time, the prince-bishop also was an imperial elector. In 1772, Francis Charles de Velbroek became the Prince-Bishop of Liege. Like the rulers we discussed in the last 2 weeks, Maria Theresa and Joseph II, Velbroek was an enlightened absolutist overseeing broad reforms in education, the arts, and government. When Velbroek died in 1784, he was succeeded as Prince-Bishop by Caesar Constantine Francis de Hohensbroek, who was not a reformer and therefore was deeply unpopular. Citizens of Liege sought constitutional reform so the Prince-Bishop would have less power to rule arbitrarily. They also took issue with Hohenbroek's taxation policies, which heavily favored the wealthy and placed most of the tax burden on the middle class and poor. And if all these issues weren't bad enough, like in France, food was scarce. On August 18, 1789, tensions in Liege exploded, inspired by events in France. Rebels stormed the citadel of the principality, and the prince-bishop fled. A republic was declared in September. The emperor attempted to mediate the dispute between the now exiled prince-bishop and the rebels, but to no avail. For the coming year, Liege would be a de facto independent republic. Meanwhile, in nearby Brabant and Flanders, two Dutch-speaking provinces of what today is Belgium, tensions were similarly heating up. In 1780, not long before she died, Maria Theresa had named her daughter Maria Christina and her son-in-law Prince Albert Casimir of Saxony as the joint governors of the Austrian Netherlands. While the reforms of Maria Theresa and Joseph were popular in Liege, in Brabant they were deeply unpopular. The people of the area were suspicious of Joseph's centralizing tendencies, particularly as they regarded the church. Whereas Joseph sought to subordinate the church to his own authority, the people of Brabant saw this move as an assault on their own deeply held Catholicism. In May 1787, more than 2 years before tensions exploded in France, rebels rose up in Brabant. The joint governors suspended Joseph's reforms in response and sought a compromise with the aggrieved parties. Emperor Joseph was angry at his reforms being stalled, but he slowed down for the time being. Nevertheless, the rebels took advantage of the law to organize more formally. By the time Joseph had caught his breath and moved in 1789 to institute more of his reforms, the rebels had assembled an army in exile led by John Andrew van der Merch, and on October 24th, van der Merch's army invaded Brabant from the neighboring Dutch Republic. Their first battle with Austrian forces at the Battle of Turnhout resulted in a loss for Austria. Subsequently, Austrian forces were expelled from the remainder of the Austrian Netherlands with the exception of Luxembourg. In January 1790, a Republican United States of Belgium was declared with Prussian backing. The revolt in Liege was one thing, but the full secession of the Austrian Netherlands was too much for Vienna to tolerate. Joseph died in February 1790, but his successor, his brother Leopold, redeployed troops from a recently ended war with the Ottoman Empire to suppress the revolt in Belgium. By December, the Belgian forces had been defeated and the Austrian Netherlands reintegrated back into the Habsburg monarchy. From there, Leopold sent the army into Liege to reclaim that territory as well. The rebels there were also defeated and the exiled prince-bishop returned to his throne. However, that's not the end of the story. Events in France would soon expand beyond the borders of that country. The reaction in Austria to the French Revolution is an important topic not only because of the state system brought into existence at the time of the Peace of Westphalia, which the French Revolution was now threatening, but also because the leaders of Austria during the Revolution were, in sequence, two of Marie Antoinette's brothers and then her nephew. And if you recall from the last episode, Marie Antoinette was the brother of Emperor Joseph II. When the revolution initially broke out and Joseph was still the ruler of Austria, the emperor concerned himself with establishing a safe escape route for his sister and brother-in-law, King Louis XVI of France, in case the need arose for them to flee. When Leopold succeeded his brother as Austrian ruler and Holy Roman Emperor, he shared his late brother's concern for their sister's well-being. Worrying that war with France would break out eventually, Leopold shored up his alliances. First, he smoothed things over in his relationship with Prussia. Tensions had been high between Austria and Prussia since their dispute over Silesia in the 7 Years' War, and they had been made more tense with the events in Belgium, where Prussia briefly backed the rebels. In addition to easing tensions with Prussia, Leopold also made diplomatic overtures toward Great Britain. In June 1791, when King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette attempted to flee Paris and were brought back to Paris as prisoners, Leopold appealed to the other sovereigns of Europe to join him in demanding the French king and queen's release. While his call was largely rebuffed the following month, Leopold and King Frederick William II of Prussia issued the joint declaration of Pillnitz. In this document, the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Prussia wrote that they, quote, regard the actual situation of His Majesty the King of France as a matter of communal interest for all sovereigns of Europe, end quote. They stated further that they hopefully would be able to reestablish, quote, the foundations of a monarchical government suiting to the rights of the sovereigns and favorable to the well-being of the French, end quote. Finally, Leopold and Frederick William said that if the reestablishment of Louis's reign did not come to pass, that they would, quote, act promptly and unanimously with the forces necessary for realizing the proposed and communal goal and expectation. They will give the suitable orders to their troops so that they will be ready to commence activity, end quote. In the immediate aftermath of the Declaration of Pillnitz, Louis swore allegiance to the French Constitution, and Leopold believed that a peaceful solution might be in the offing. However, the saber-rattling from France had only gotten worse, and by April 1792, Austria and Prussia would be at war with France. Leopold didn't survive to see war break out. After less than 2 years on the throne of Austria, he died and was succeeded by his son, who reigned as Francis II. Francis would be the last man to be both Archduke of Austria and Holy Roman Emperor. In fact, he would be the last Holy Roman Emperor, period. However, he would also be the first person to be called the Emperor of Austria, but more on that later. The first war between revolutionary France and Austria went on for more than 5 years. During that period, King Louis and Marie Antoinette were executed. The Jacobins rose to power in France, the Reign of Terror was unleashed, and Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power before he was definitively defeated in 1815. And there would be 7 highly costly wars, but I don't want to weigh down this podcast about Austria with too many details about the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Our focus, after all, should be on Austria. So how did Austria fare in these wars? The short answer is not very well. In the Third War, fought from April 1805 to July 1806, France, led by Napoleon, fought the combined forces of Russia and Austria. At Austerlitz, on December 2, 1805, the French were victorious, and at the end of 1805, Francis signed the Treaty of Pressburg in what is now Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. In that treaty, French claims to Austrian territory in present-day Italy were recognized. In addition, Austria ceded territory to Bavaria, which was one of the German states that had broken with the Holy Roman Empire to fight alongside Napoleon. These events, along with Napoleon's earlier annexation of imperial territory on the west bank of the Rhine River, resulted in the French emperor's creation of the Confederation of the Rhine. Cobbled together from Napoleon's client states of the Holy Roman Empire, the natural result of the creation of the Confederation from Napoleon's viewpoint was the permanent dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire. The traditional historiography of this event has tended to view the end of the empire as a foregone conclusion, set in motion with the Peace of Westphalia 150 years earlier, and expedited by the advent of Napoleon. According to this view, by the time the coup de grace was delivered by Francis II, the empire was well past its sell-by date. as we have begun to consider for many decades, Austria's position as the most powerful land within the Holy Roman Empire was being challenged by Prussia. This rivalry would continue well into the 19th century. For now, suffice it to say that if Austria and Prussia began to emerge as two separate Germanies, then the Confederation of the Rhine played the role of the third Germany. Although political maneuvering among these three German powers had, to a large extent, already begun by the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, the processes that culminated in the empire's dissolution were more complex than the traditional view of Napoleon carving off Rhineland provinces from the empire to form a buffer against Prussia. Instead, other innovations were more important, such as the principal conclusion of the imperial delegation, or Reichsdeputationshauptschluss, according to which a massive reorganization of the imperial states was undertaken, and Catholic power within the empire diminished relative to Protestant power. Although such a reconfiguration would seem to weaken Austria's position within the empire, it nevertheless allowed Francis II to consolidate authority over the remaining Catholic dominions. The final stage of the empire's disappearance involved the transition of Francis from Holy Roman Emperor to Emperor of Austria, a change that took place 2 years earlier, largely in preparation for the empire's imminent dissolution. One of the major figures in the historiography of the Habsburg monarchy, Peter Wilson, has masterfully detailed the delicate negotiations with France that allowed Napoleon to elevate himself to the title of Emperor of France, while preventing him from making a claim to the throne of Charlemagne, agreeing that neither the French nor Austrian emperor would lay claim to the title of Holy Roman Emperor. Quote, both new titles were more royal than imperial. There was still only one emperor in Europe, end quote. That this emperor and the Emperor of Austria were the same person made little difference with the knowledge that the Holy Roman Empire would soon disappear. In a final piece of imperial chess, Francis II and his foreign minister, Count Stadion, agreed that Francis's abdication from the throne of Charlemagne should coincide with the dissolution of the empire to prevent Bavaria or Saxony from claiming the throne for themselves, which was a right reserved to both states under the imperial constitution during any interregnum. Thus, even in finally relinquishing control of the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburgs recognized not only the emergence of Napoleon and France as a continental power and a sort of parity with Prussia and the Confederation of the Rhine, but also the potential competition to be mounted by German states left independent by the empire's end. Thus did the Holy Roman Empire go into the dustbin of history, and the Empire of Austria emerge as a great power in the first decade of the 19th century. We'll pick up here in the next episode. Thanks for listening.